I wanted to wear my Texas hat up here so I could apologize for not being dressed, because a Texan is always dressed with his hat. But my clothes are in Rome, and so instead of bowing out, I'm going to go ahead and do it. This hat, by the way, is older than any of my students. As I understand it, the reason why I was invited here was not to actually write a paper, but to, since I'm basically a storyteller and a preacher, as well as an academic, I'm supposed to give people a kind of a personal, existential feel for my involvement in the Gulen movement and how it has progressed and how it has affected already interfaith dialogue in the United States of America. And Texas, by the way, is still part of the United States of America, though a lot of them don't know that. And so what I'll be doing primarily is just going over this, this abstract and making some further comments from a paper that I've already written and presented at Georgetown University that was entitled Fethullah Gulen, Preacher of Pietism and of Activism with Integrity. And that is what really struck me the most as I got involved with the people who were supporting the Gulen movement. And that is that there was not enough emphasis at that time on the fact that Fethullah Gulen was a preacher. And one of the reasons is because in Western and American scholarship for the last several decades, there's just been kind of the drift to the understanding that religious piety really doesn't have anything to do with anything good, that religious piety is the source of almost all things bad, and that, I believe, is one of the things that Fethullah Gulen is working against. And so I think that aspect of his personality and of his work and of his influence needs to be kept in mind, because like all movements, it will probably secularize to some extent and maybe even secularize itself out of existence if it has the impact that our Dr. Webb says that it might have. But on the other hand, I always want to keep the historical fact in mind that almost all of the great movements, particularly in the English-speaking world, England and America, were not advanced by people of the European Enlightenment. They were primarily advanced, at least in their success, by preachers. And I think that's true in the case of Mr. Gulen, that his power does not come necessarily from his academic knowledge, which is very great, but from his commitment to God and his commitment to the fact that without God in the world, whether it's because of just nominal Christianity or nominal Muslim Islam or what some people would call real Christianity or not real Christianity, or real Islam, not real Islam, the activism is going to come primarily from people who have a very deep commitment. In fact, in the paper that I wrote for Georgetown, which you can find on the Gulen website, so I'm not going to read very much of it, I head the paper with a quotation from Boris Pasternak. "It is not revolution and upheavals that clear roads to new and better days, but someone's soul inspired and ablaze. I think Mr. Pasternak captures the essence of what I felt for a long time in terms of academic study. Actually, my position at the University of Houston, I had taught for the St. Thomas University for 11 years, and I've been at University of Houston for 26 years. But I had tenure at the University of St. Thomas, but I didn't take that to the University of Houston. Instead, I applied for a clinical professorship, which in the United States means that you are part of the community and you are offering your services to the university so that the university can keep integrated with the community. And so my field of religious studies is, to me, not just an academic exercise, but a very personal and existential exercise. I didn't know anything about Islam when I was growing up. My mother would always read to me Ripley's Believe It or Not. And every year, Ripley's Believe It or Not put a story in about the whirling dervishes. And it told you that these people were from Turkey, but it didn't tell you they were Muslims. So I still didn't know much about Islam. But my mother used to call us whirling dervishes when we were acting up. And it wasn't until more than 60 years later that I actually met the whirling dervishes in Konya and got their autographs just like they were rock stars. But there's a lot that's happened in between. I got a call in 2003 from the University of Texas. And I had been involved in interfaith dialogue for 35 years, starting out primarily with interfaith dialogue between Christians and Jews. And then I established the first interfaith dialogue between Muslims and Jews and Christians, and then an interfaith dialogue of all religions. But that was sponsored primarily by the Conference of Christians and Jews, and they went out of the interfaith dialogue business. So I was kind of strung out for several years till I got this call from the University of Houston. They said, we have a man here who's been teaching in the sociology department, and we would like to know if you would like to have a Muslim scholar to be a visiting professor. And I said, yes, sir, I would very much like that. And so Mohammed Chetan showed up in my office, and he didn't let me know very much about who he was, except that he was a Muslim. And I was also supposed to kind of keep my eye over his shoulder because he was still working on his PhD in England. And so I tried to do that, but I didn't really have to do very much because he is a great man and a great scholar and is especially passionate in his writings. But he got me involved in the Gulen movement and took me on the first Turkish trip at least from Texas. I don't know where. My wife and I, he took. And it was the best trip I'd ever had in my life, even though I was afraid to go because if you know Muhammad, you know that he's kind of keeps things close to his chest, and so I really didn't know what was going to take place. And but when I got to Turkey, my whole life changed to a certain extent. And so the last several years have been one of the high points in my life, getting to know these people and they're being my best friends in town. In fact, I tell my church when I go to one of these meetings that I'm going to go talk to people who respect me so that they'll know that, that maybe they ought to treat me a little better, because it's the Gulen people who treat me the best in Houston. Anyway, since I met Mohammed, I now serve on the board of IID. I serve on the board of the Gulen Institute at the University of Houston. And I served on the board of the Harmony Schools in Texas. There are 33 Harmony Schools in Texas. uh, and those have been established since Mohammed, I think, came to Houston. And it's just been a great experience. But I think it's also been especially great for America as a whole, because these people are doing things that I never hear of. Even though I'm on the board, I don't even hear of them until they're already going great in some other university or some other part of the United States. And these people know how to get people's attention to the problem of a possible conflict of civilizations. So one of the first courses I taught with the help of Mohammed was a course in the conflict of civilizations. And of course, that course was followed by a question mark, because that discussion had not really taken hold very much in the United States. Since then, I also have a number of teachers teaching for me at the University of Houston, and I teach courses with them. For instance, this semester I'm teaching a course on stories in the Quran and the Bible, a comparative literary course with Ibrahim Sumar, and he's a great teacher. He's becoming a United States citizen. He became a United States citizen yesterday. So I'm going back home Monday and give him a Stetson, a Texas cowboy hat. That's probably worth several $100s, but I bought it at an antique store. But anyway, these people are just people that you will fall in love with because of their servanthood, because of their commitment. They're committed to a lot of work for very little financial reward themselves. But the reward is that they are dedicated to the ideals of Mr. Gullin, and I think that is one of the great injections into the American conversation. They already know important Americans than I do, and so I get to meet a lot of important people just because I hang around with them. But in the state of Texas, just a few weeks ago, passed a resolution. This is the state of Texas Congress, which is made up probably the majority of what we call in America the Tea Party. But they passed a resolution honoring Fethullah Gulen. And they immediately got flack, metaphorical flack, of course, from their constituents. And so we had to go up to Austin and encourage the guys who had passed this, and I think they're going to stick with it. But this is one of the ways in which Gulen affects, or the Gulen movement affects places all over the United States in ways that absolutely call forth dialogue and discussion. And so that's the reason why I'm so much in favor of the movement. And in my paper, which you can get online from the Gulen website, I compare Gulen to an English preacher. Actually, he wasn't a formal pastor or clergyman, but he was what I would call a great preacher, and that was William Wilberforce. When I first heard things that went on in the Gulen movement, I thought first of John Wesley, and then I tremendous influence on the abolition of slavery in the United States, even though you can't find an American student anymore who even knows who William Force is. And that's one of my goals, is to try to let people know who he was, even though there are cities named after him and colleges named after him in the United States. And he influenced, obviously, Abraham Lincoln and so forth. But anyway, as you can tell, the point I'm trying to get across here is probably what one sociologist or psychologist called the blick. That is, I'm trying to give you a feeling of the excitement that I feel and that a lot of people in the United States feel about being associated with this group, because we have never found a way to get the kind of dialogue going that they're being able to do in the United States. But let me just conclude by saying that what Gulen is trying to do is the same kind of thing that Wilberforce and a lot of other people, Martin Luther King and other people in the United States did. That is, they weren't, well, Wilberforce was somewhat of a politician, but he was a politician of one. But Martin Luther King was not a politician at all. He was a Baptist minister, and if we'd waited on the politicians, there would be no civil rights movement in the United States. So what these people do, they proclaim a strong humanitarian condemnation of terrorism, slavery, or anything else on moral grounds. They show the incompatibility of terrorism or slavery with the most profound principles of their religious traditions. They show how religious texts have been abused, and pointing to the fact that individuals, special interest, and special economic trades are profiting from the continuation of these horrific activities for economic or political power, and providing practical service and education that promotes mutual understanding, respect, opportunity, and hope. So in the case of the institutions encouraged by Gulen, they would foster interfaith and intercultural dialogue, mutual understanding, and respect, giving hope for upward mobility. This golden generation, which Wilberforce had and which Martin Luther King had, these golden generations who struck at the right time. And if Wilberforce had not believed deep in his soul that a great deal of prevailing cultural Christianity could be clearly contrasted with what he called real Christianity, we would never have heard of him. The same may be said about Martin Luther King in the 60s, Nelson Mandela in Christian Dutch reform in South Africa. If Fethullah Gulen and his teachers had not had the moral audacity to speak of a true Islam, as opposed to an Islam which was merely cultural or fundamentalistic, reactionism, we would never have heard of him and would not be gathered together in this conference. So this approach is ripe for sharing with the world and is consistent with the worldview and shared values of both Christians and Muslims, and even more particularly with the movements we've been describing. As one Wilberforce scholar succinctly describes this approach, it is providing vision, establishing of networking, and finally making goodness fashionable. Thank you.